Chapter 11. Wise Beyond His Years. I had just returned home from helping with Joseph's class at school when the phone rang. It was the secretary from Nord Elementary calling to let me know that Joseph had a headache and wanted to come home. I jumped back in the car and went to the school and picked him up. When I got there, I was a bit impatient with him because I had just left the school when I had to turn right back around and go pick him up. Plus, I was upset that something else besides a headache was wrong with him. Earlier in the week, I had left a message with Dr. Amelon to call me back. I had just arrived back home with Joseph when the phone rang. It was Dr. Amelon returning my call. I told him that I called to let him know how much I appreciated him being Joseph's doctor, and that out of all the doctors Joseph had been treated by, he was our favorite. I told him that Joseph happened to be home that day because of a headache, but other than that, everything was fine. I was lying. I started crying over the phone. Joseph had been in remission from his transplant for 10 months now, and I wanted reassurance from Dr. Amelon that Joseph was out of the woods. Dr. Amelon said that Joseph was doing exceptionally well, considering everything he had been through, and that the longer he was in remission, the better his chances were of a full recovery. I hung up the phone from the doctor and told Joseph, who was lying on the couch, how much I loved him, that he was the best thing that had ever happened to me. What I didn't tell Dr. Amelon or Joseph is that I could see the same symptoms in Joseph that I saw in him before he was diagnosed. Joseph was tiring easier now. His appetite had declined significantly. He walked slower. His stomach was swollen. And I noticed the other night, when he was sleeping, that he was sweating. A key sign of leukemia is night sweats. I knew in my heart that Joseph had relapsed, but I didn't want to admit it in my mind. I was faking happiness, humor, and contentment. Alberto had also noticed the change in his son's actions and appearance. He and I were thinking the same thing, but neither one of us would say it out loud. It was September 17th, 1990, the day after my mom's birthday, and Joseph had an appointment in Sacramento for a routine visit. I dragged my feet that day. I didn't want to go to the doctor that day. I made every excuse to stay home, but we went anyway. We had to go. We were called in on time, Joseph and I. Joseph had the routine exam, weight, height, blood pressure, and blood draw. A while later in the examining room, the doctor and his nurse came in to talk to us. I knew right away that something was wrong. I knew before they even told us. Joseph had relapsed. His white count was 80,000, way too high for a normal infection. He definitely relapsed with leukemia. I was so upset. I started crying, grabbing the doctor's arm, pleading with him. Joseph was on the examining table, crying and saying he didn't want to die. He was rolling back and forth, saying over and over, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." The nurse was standing beside him, trying to comfort him. I was on the opposite side of the room with the doctor, pinning him down, making him tell me what I needed to know. How long? How long did Joseph have to live? With his head down, the doctor told me, Joseph has 3 months at the most to live. That meant he would be gone before Christmas. I couldn't handle this. What had I done to deserve this? I was so sad, so very, very sad. The nurse asked me if there was anyone I wanted to call, and I told her to call my husband for me. Alberto and I weren't getting along very well, as it was. This news was liable to break us apart. Our marriage was so stressed due to my lack of attention toward Alberto and his lack of understanding for me. I had always felt that he was jealous of my love and affection that I poured upon Joseph. I don't know what it was. Joseph had a bone marrow aspiration under medication because I insisted that he feel no pain. And after a little while, I helped him out of the back door and we drove home alone together. Joseph slept most of the way home because of the sedation, and he was very tired as it was anyway. But during our ride home, Joseph told me he thought I should have another baby. I was surprised. For one so young, Joseph was so intense. I told Joseph that Dad was fixed and we couldn't have another baby. Besides, Alberto didn't want any more children, and we were happy with the ones we had. Joseph didn't believe me and repeated his suggestion. I think you should have another baby. Then Joseph leaned over, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. I don't even remember how I got home. That part of my memory is a blur. I still wasn't ready to give up on God. I just knew if we put Joseph back on chemotherapy, that he would get well again. I was wrong. Joseph was not getting well. In fact, the little bit of chemo they did give him made him very ill. His hair fell out very fast. The cartilage in his nose deteriorated. His skin color was very bad looking. He was not in great shape at all. Due to his relapse, he had to be homeschooled again. So Jocelyn started coming to our house again on a regular basis. That was good for Joseph. He really liked Jocelyn, and he was very receptive to her teachings. A lot of times they would skip the study and just play games. They made games together, pictures together, made up stories together. Having Jocelyn as Joseph's tutor are happy memories. Many times when Jocelyn was at our home teaching, I would come into the room and find her and Joseph praying together about something. That made me so very happy and proud of my son, that through all that he had been through, his faith in God never faltered. Only once in a great while would he ever feel sorry for himself. He was almost always concerned with the needs of others rather than himself. Joseph had experienced his fair share of loss of loved ones in his young life. Shortly before his 5th birthday, we lost Alberto's father to a drunken driving accident in which Alberto's father was the victim. Then, 9 months later, my father died of a heart attack, which Joseph was deeply affected by. And while he was in transplant, Joseph lost 2 friends at the hospital who had relapsed after their transplants. Yes, Joseph had been through a lot in the short 9 years of his life, but through it all, he kept a positive attitude, laughter on his lips, and love in his heart. He was truly a God-given gift to me. Joseph was always a wise child, to whom I often went for counsel and comfort. As he progressed through his illness, Joseph was less and less of a human being, and he turned more and more into a spiritual being. I guess that's why he affected so many people. When he would walk into a room, you could just feel the spirituality and holiness exude from his being. After the doctors had told us that Joseph was terminal, had no chance for survival, Joseph seemed to come to terms with the fact that he was dying. It was I who would not, or could not, accept the doctor's diagnosis. I can remember how many times Joseph was trying to guide me and prepare me for the future. Less than a month after Joseph's relapse, I forget what we were talking about, Joseph brought up the subject of how he felt that Dad and I should have another baby. I told him again that we couldn't have another baby, but that I would like to have another one. Being with Joseph all the time was such a wonderful thing. He seemed so knowledgeable and so deep and so spiritual. One time, when we had just said goodbye to Jocelyn, I got up from my chair and was about to start lunch for Alberto, Joseph was sitting next to me on the chair and said the neatest thing. He said to me, "Mom, I think I'm an angel, and God sent me down to earth for a reason." I told him I agreed with him, that I thought he was an angel too. But what did God send him down to earth for? Joseph said, "I'm an angel, and God sent me down to earth to teach, but now my job is done." I didn't understand exactly what Joseph meant by that, but later I would find out. The fall of 1990, when Joseph relapsed, was a very dry time for the Sacramento Valley. It had not rained adequately for the past couple years or so. The fall days were not too terribly harsh. They were more like spring days. One day when we were over at Nadine's house, visiting and sitting on the side of the hill playing with the cats, Joseph told all of us, "I think God is calling me." A little surprised by this statement, I asked Joseph what God was calling him to do. He told us, Nadine, Mary, and me, that God is calling me home. He is calling me to go to heaven. I didn't have much to say. I just put my head down and looked at the grass. Joseph was in touch with the Lord on a much more personal level than anyone I had ever known. That was not the last time he would try and tell us, and try and prepare us for the future. I kept taking Joseph for his chemotherapy. I just knew he was going to get well. I knew he had to get well because I would never be able to live without him, and God would never punish me in that way. But Joseph's health was getting worse and worse. He was in pain and had low-grade fevers constantly. One time, while he was getting chemo, he told a nurse that he was ready to die, but his mom wasn't ready for him to die. The nurse didn't tell me what Joseph had told her until 2.5 years later. Joseph's statement didn't surprise me. He was always so in touch with his feelings. Because of all the chemotherapy Joseph had received and the bone marrow transplant he went through, Joseph's immune system was very, very weak, which led to several infections and hospital stays. Again, we were in UC Davis Medical Center, in the hospital, in the isolation ward, because Joseph got a fever of 107 degrees. Joseph told me in front of a nurse that God was calling him. God was calling him to heaven. It made me cry. Even though I never wanted to admit it, Joseph knew he was going to die. All the praying in the world by myself, my friends, my husband, my family, and even people we didn't know, would not change the fact that Joseph wasn't getting any better. He was getting worse. After the last hospital stay at UC Davis, Joseph made me promise that I would never take him back to the hospital again, and I didn't. On the advice of a doctor here in Chico, Dr. Tedford, we took Joseph off all the medication, antibiotics, chemotherapy, everything except pain medication. It was December by this time, Joseph's favorite holiday. But not this year. No matter what anyone did, it didn't change the fact that we were losing him. Alberto and I were really fighting now. The stress of us losing our most favorite son was more than he could bear. One morning, Joseph and I were asleep in my bed. It had been a very rough night for him, and I was exhausted, only sleeping maybe 2 hours. Alberto had slept in the living room on the couch. All of a sudden, I feel tickling on my nose. I bat it away with my hand, only for the tickling to return a second later. I opened up my eyes to see Alberto standing over me, trying to wake me up and get my attention. I was enraged. "Get away from me," I said sharply. He was saying, "Come on, I need you. Let's go in the other room." I was so tired from all that I had been through lately, with Joseph and hospital stays and the constant worry, that I was in no mood to do anything but sleep. Well, Alberto didn't understand this, and when I rejected him, he was madder than I had ever thought of him being. He started cussing at me to get up. Then I jumped up and started cussing at him to leave me alone, that he was going to wake Joseph. We both went into the living room to fight this out, away from Joseph. It was awful. Alberto lit up a cigarette, which was totally against the rules of the house. Smoking was only permitted outside. I was so mad I could have hit him with a baseball bat, if there would have been one there. I told him right to his face, with so much anger and hatred for him. I wish you were the one dying in the other room, and not Joseph. I really do. How could God take Joseph away from me and leave me with you? I hate you. And I did hate him at the time. Many times during Joseph's struggles in the hospital, when I was there with him alone, did I call Alberto to come and be with me, and he refused. These were the things I wouldn't be able to forget very easily. I had felt abandoned by him on more than one occasion. But because of my love for Joseph and Mary, I put my wants on the back burner. I swallowed my pride for the sake of the children. It would be a very long time for me to be able to forgive Alberto. But I was no saint either. I had my downfalls, even though I couldn't see them. That day and many days after were very hard for our family, but we stuck together and tried to make the most of it. We never did go back to the hospital after Joseph made me promise him we wouldn't. In fact, shortly before Christmas Day, Joseph told us that those doctors didn't know everything. His 3 months were up, and he was still alive. Chapter 12. The answer was no. It took about a week or so to get all the medications out of Joseph's system, but after that, he seemed to get better. We were able to do more things than usual. We played cards every evening. Jocelyn came over to tutor him on a regular basis. Even Joseph's schoolmates, Mark and Eric, would come over and visit. I even felt comfortable enough to go to town and leave Joseph with a friend. One time, I left Joseph with Terry and Nord while I went to the dentist. While Joseph was there, he and Terry had a great conversation, and he even got to play with Eric, Krista, and Mary when they got out of school. It was amazing. Joseph seemed to be getting back to his old self again. Once, while he was in the bathtub, he called to me, saying, "Maybe God is really working for us, Mom." Since Joseph was doing well, I made another dentist appointment for myself and left him with Nadine this time. She was more than happy to watch Joseph for me while I was gone. After I returned a few hours later, Nadine said she had the most wonderful conversation with Joseph on the subject of the Bible. Joseph counseled Nadine on many areas of biblical interests, but the one he touched on most was the sign of the beast and what to look out for. Nadine was amazed at Joseph's knowledge in this area. She had gone to church for many years of her life and had never been taught this part of the Bible, which exists in the book of Revelations. I had become used to Joseph and his exceptional knowledge of God's holy book and words. But what did surprise me was when we went outside and were walking around in the fruit orchard visiting. Nadine and I were walking slowly and talking, when Nadine noticed Joseph drawing something with a stick in the dirt. I didn't pay that much attention, but the drawing really got Nadine's attention. She asked Joseph what he was drawing, and he told her it was a picture of him in heaven, that he was going to come back to earth with Jesus and fight the devil. The picture was of a man dressed with armor on. The man in the drawing had a helmet, a shield, a sword, a breastplate, and boots. The statement Joseph made sent chills through my body. He seemed to know his destiny, no matter how much I tried to deny it. Nadine just said, "Joseph, you truly amaze me." Joseph amazed many people. It was almost a month since Christmas had passed. We had a great time together, Joseph, Mary, and I. We went to a lot of places together. We went bowling with a group of people here in Chico who all had kids with different kinds of cancers or were recovering from cancer. We had tournament Uno games on a nightly basis. And I will never forget when we went roller skating on January 25th, 1991, with the Nord School. Joseph really wasn't feeling very good that day, but I made him go with me because I had been neglecting Mary enough as it was. I felt it was very important to take her and some of her friends to the skating party. After we arrived at the skating rink, we were greeted by many of Joseph's friends and classmates. Joseph really didn't want to be there, so he just hung back and leaned against the wall until I got Mary all set, and then we were going to leave. While I was in line with Mary, Teresa, Mark's mom, one of Joseph's close friends, went over to Joseph and started talking to him. After she walked away from Joseph and came over to the group where I was, here comes Joseph. I asked Joseph what he was doing, and he said that he had decided to stay. I was very happy because this meant that I could stay also. I asked Teresa what she had said to him. She said nothing really, that she was just sad he wasn't feeling good. Joseph was the hit of the party. He got the chance to talk to all of his schoolmates and teachers, and a lot of the mothers who were very supportive of our family. It was a great afternoon. But on the way home, Joseph started feeling very ill again and had to lie down in the back seat of the car. The next morning was Saturday morning cartoons. This was Joseph's favorite time of the week. Since he was a baby, he loved to watch Saturday morning cartoons. This was usually a time that I had to clean my house or get paperwork done. Joseph and Mary could watch Saturday morning cartoons together for at least 2 or 3 hours. But not this morning. Joseph didn't want to watch cartoons. He didn't want to do anything except lay down and be quiet. Joseph was fading, and fading fast. Less than a week before that, we were at the bowling alley, bowling and eating pizza. But not this day. For a month, Joseph had been talking about purchasing a suit for himself. So, in our own chaotic way of trying to please, Alberto and I decided on this day that we would go and buy Joseph a suit. Looking back, this was such a stupid thing to do. But our emotions and our minds were all messed up because we could see the severe decline in Joseph's health and his mental ability. We wanted to do anything to please him. We did take him to town to try on and buy a suit, but he just wasn't up to the activity. We ended up just stopping at the little market where my car had broken down next to, buying some chips and soda, and going home. Before we drove back home, Mary and I had to switch places, and I rode in the back seat, with Joseph lying down with his head in my lap. Sunday came, and I got up and ready for church. I still wouldn't accept the fact that Joseph was not going to get better. I thought if I stayed as normal as possible, that he would too, and that he would heal miraculously. Joseph was in my bed, crying because he wasn't able to go to church with me as much as he liked to. I told him that when a person doesn't feel well, he can't go to church, and that God understands that. That explanation made him feel a little better, good enough to relax. Joseph stayed home with Alberto, who was not happy at all that I didn't stay home. It was good for Alberto to be able to feel what I had been feeling for months. On the way home from church, Mary was questioning me about Joseph, saying that Daddy had told her that Joseph was going to die. I told her that Daddy didn't know everything, that God was the only one who could decide who would live or die. She seemed to be able to understand that, and was happy to know that God was the boss. He would never take her brother away from her like that. Joseph had a very rough night that Sunday night. He couldn't get comfortable. He was sleeping on the couch in his favorite spot, and I was kneeling at his feet, praying, as I often did, telling God that he couldn't take my son away from me, that I wouldn't let him, and that I couldn't live without him. So many times in the last 2 weeks I had prayed that prayer. So many times I told God what he was going to do. My anger was showing. I guess that was one of the only ways my mind was able to deal with such a horrific situation. As I knelt next to Joseph's feet, praying, I looked up and spoke to Joseph. I tried to tell him to relax, but he couldn't. I asked him what was wrong. Joseph told me that he didn't want to fall asleep. He was afraid if he fell asleep, he would never wake up. I asked him what he was scared of. He said he was scared because there are no mommies and daddies in heaven. I told Joseph, just keep your eyes on the Lord, that he always has been there for you, and he is not going to leave you now. Joseph said, I'm afraid to leave you and Daddy. I'm afraid you two will fight and break up. I'm afraid you and Daddy will break up if I die. I reassured Joseph by telling him that Daddy and I won't break up. We have Mary. We will stay together for Mary. I promised my son I would stay with his dad until Mary was taken care of. I've kept that promise for more than 20 years. Joseph tossed and turned some more, not being able to relax because of his fear. I was very upset and not myself at all. I was crying. I wanted Joseph to be comfortable, but he just would not stop tossing and turning. Finally, out of frustration, I reminded Joseph of what he had told me many times before. Joseph had told me on more than one occasion that he was glad he was the one that was sick, because it would kill him to have to watch someone he loved suffer. I told Joseph to stop fighting. You are killing me now to have to watch you suffer. Just go with God. I'm not very proud of what I told him that night, but if you could have seen him suffering, you might have reacted in the same way. To watch someone suffer more than they deserved, after all has been done medically and spiritually for them, you just want the suffering to stop. That is what I was feeling that night. It seemed like after I gave Joseph permission to stop fighting death, he settled down. He asked me to take him to his bed, which was the top bunk on a bunk bed set. I didn't want to let him sleep up there, but I also wanted to please him, so I helped him up. I walked into the living room, looking out the window, praying and wondering where God was, and when he was going to answer my prayer and heal my son. I heard someone calling, "Mommy?" I turned around and could see Joseph limping down the hall. I told him, "Here I am." And he said, "Where?" I told him, "I'm right in front of you. Can't you see me?" He said he couldn't see me, and I realized Joseph was losing his eyesight. Less than a week ago, Joseph and I were laughing and playing together, and now in a few short days, a few short hours, he was dying right in front of my eyes. I comforted Joseph and led him back to bed, but a very few short moments later, Joseph was calling for me. I came to his room, and he asked me for a pan. I ran to the kitchen and retrieved a pan from the shelf, and ran back to Joseph's room just in time. Joseph started throwing up uncontrollably, and crying that his back hurt. After this ordeal, Joseph thanked me. He thanked me for the pan. He thanked me for being his mommy, and he thanked me for helping me. He thanked me for being his mommy, and he thanked me for helping him. He still would not come down from his bed, which was very upsetting to me, so I went and woke Alberto up. Alberto was quite angry with me for waking him up, because he said he was having a dream about heaven. Right when I woke him up, he was feeling the warmth of God's heavenly light. He was starting to float toward the light. I apologized, but stated that I really needed his help in trying to convince Joseph to come down from his bunk bed, because I was afraid he was going to get hurt. Alberto got up after some coaxing and went on to talk to Joseph. We finally got Joseph down, but he just wanted to lie on the couch again. This was a very restless night, and by 5 a.m., I was on the phone to Sacramento, calling Dr. Ducour, asking him if Joseph could have any drugs to comfort him. Dr. Ducour told me that Joseph could have any drugs he wanted at this point, then asked me how I was. I told him I was fine, but I really wasn't. I was on autopilot. I then called Joseph's doctor in Chico, Dr. Tedford, and told him the situation, and he gave permission for Joseph to have some morphine for pain, which a hospice nurse brought over around 7 a.m. At that time, I started calling all my relatives to tell them what was going on, that we were losing Joseph, but I didn't know how long he would hang on. These were very hard phone calls to make. Many of our relatives came and stayed the whole entire day. It was a family time for us. Later in the afternoon, the hospice nurse had to bring over another medication called Vistral to relieve Joseph's vomiting. Joseph's blood pressure was falling rapidly. He couldn't see, and he could hardly hear. Every once in a while, he would scream out. Whether it was from pain or that he was trying to keep his soul from slipping away, I do not know. I hate to think it was from pain. As the day dragged on, I was so spaced out. I was trying to do laundry to be normal, hoping that this would all end, that a miracle would occur and Joseph would get up well and whole again. But this was not to be. I was in the room with Joseph almost all of the day, except for an occasional bathroom break or a breath of fresh air. I gave him drinks on a regular basis, helped carry him to the bathroom once, and brushed his teeth with the sponge toothbrush to help keep his mouth moist because he was breathing through his mouth. The only time I had left the room for any length of time was when he started breathing very rapidly. I was in the kitchen playing with a nephew of mine, who was only 1 at the time, when I saw one of my sisters-in-law run by me and get Alberto. Less than a minute after that, my other sister-in-law, Alice, came and told me I had better go to the bedroom. When I came to the bedroom, I saw my husband kneeling down beside the bed, crying and trying to shake Joseph. As I knelt next to Alberto and started gazing into Joseph's eyes, I could see him taking his last breaths. Deep inhales and then long exhales. His eyes were staring off toward the ceiling with a vacant expression. At this time, and at only this time, did I realize that Joseph was truly dying. I tried to get closer to him, but Alberto was there and wouldn't let me next to him. This killed me that night and has bothered me ever since. I took care of this child with all my heart and soul for 17 months, and the day of his death, I couldn't even get next to him. Joseph was dead. His soul had been released. He was on his way to heaven, to a better life, an everlasting life. At the exact same moment, with our heads and eyes focused on the same part of the ceiling, next to the corner of the room. Alberto and I looked up and said, "Goodbye, Joseph." Pandemonium then struck. Mary walked into the room and asked if Joseph were dead, and we said yes. She started screaming a scream I will never forget. Then, in my efforts to control her, I started screaming for her to shut up. All the commotion brought everyone into the room. All the aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews. All of us were in the room together, screaming and crying. Crying for our little gifted boy. The boy who had in some way or another affected us all. Chapter 13. The Inspiration of Joseph. Joseph died on a Monday and was buried on a Thursday. There were 600 people at his funeral. Many people I didn't even know, but a lot of people I did know. His funeral was in a church that had a stage and was newly remodeled in red, just like the dream I had way back when Joseph was newly diagnosed in the hospital. I was reliving the dream I had and was feeling as if I was in a dreamlike state. The flowers were the same, the players were the same, with only one difference. This was reality, and I was living it, and Joseph was really dead. It was a beautiful funeral, though, or graduation, as some people called it. One of the best memories is the letter Jocelyn wrote to Joseph and read to the crowd. It reads as follows. Dear Joseph, it seems hard to believe that just a few days ago we were sitting at your kitchen table doing our school stuff, as you called it, and now you are gone. My mind has been filled with memories of our times together over these past 18 months, and as I reflect, it seems that in many ways, you were the teacher and I the learner. You taught me so much about life, Joseph, for you possessed many qualities rare to one of your age. It was such a joy for me to be able to observe your family life. Of course, your mom was the one who was usually around, and to say that the love you two shared was special doesn't begin to describe the relationship. A closeness that was tender, yet not overly mushy. It allowed for lots of chiding and kidding without hurt feelings. Communication that was constant, sometimes verbal, sometimes silent. A oneness that I shall strive for with my own family. And although the other members of your family weren't usually home when I was there, you referred to them often. Your love and respect for your father was evident. I was continually impressed by your devotion and kindness to your sister and closest friend, Mary. Thank you, Joseph, for teaching me about family love. We tried several times to write the story of your experiences, but it was just too painful for you. You wanted to block out all those hard times. We finally did it by writing about little Joey Mouse. Your delightful artwork was to be the finishing touch, but we didn't make it that far. Thank you, Joseph, for teaching me about bravery. It was difficult to see you on the days you weren't feeling well, yet your spirit of survival was never extinguished. Thank you, Joseph, for teaching me about hope and endurance. When I arrived at your house last Friday, you were hiding from me under the covers on your mom's bed. I love your sense of humor. You were always poking fun, teasing, telling a funny story. Thanks, Joseph, for encouraging me to see the lighter side, to look for the fun. A really great day was the day you told me that you and your family had committed your lives to Christ. You had no idea how I had prayed for that day. And because of that, I can say with rejoicing, I will see you again. But don't worry, I'll leave the multiplication flashcards behind. Thanks, Joseph, for teaching me about newfound faith and God's grace. I love you, Joseph, your teacher and friend, Jocelyn. The only comfort I could get from this day on would be the fact that Joseph was no longer suffering and no longer in pain. Other than that, I was pretty unhappy. After Joseph's funeral, Alberto invited all who wanted to come over to our house. I wasn't up for this, but I put on a brave smile and welcomed everyone. Many people were at our house before we even arrived. The basketball court was filled with guys shooting hoops. The driveway was full of cars, and the house was brimming with friends and relatives. As I made my way from the car to the house, admiring all the different plants and flowers that lined our deck, I made small talk as I went. Finally entering the house, I made a quick survey of the situation, food and drinks. All seemed to be well, with Annie and Harvey taking charge. After about 15 minutes, I noticed that Alberto was nowhere to be found. I looked inside and outside and couldn't find him anywhere. After searching almost everywhere, I noticed that down the hall, our bedroom door was shut. I headed for the shut door. As I opened it, I could hear someone sobbing. It was Alberto. He was lying on the bed, gazing out the window, sobbing like a baby. I asked him what was wrong. He said that he missed Joseph so much and just kept looking out the window, sobbing and sobbing. I was mad. Here again, after inviting all these people to our house, Alberto abandoned me. He was in the bedroom hiding from everyone, leaving me with the responsibility of entertaining our guests. I told Alberto this: Get up and go out and entertain your guests. You invited them. Alberto, you cannot lie there and feel sorry for yourself. Joseph never did. From this day forth, I am going to incorporate all the characteristics that I admired so much in Joseph into my own life. So, get up. And I left the room. A few short minutes later, Alberto came out and joined the group. After a week had passed since Joseph's funeral, Alberto went back to work. A week after that, Mary went back to school. I hadn't worked since Joseph was diagnosed, so I was home alone most of the day. I never took a shower until afternoon and spent most of my mornings crying on the couch. The only comfort I allowed myself to receive were the many cards and letters offering condolences. Here is one of the letters I received from someone I didn't even know. The letter reads as follows. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Alvarez, we have never met, but I wanted to express my deepest sympathy to you and to tell you that your child has, and always will be, an inspiration in my life. My son was hospitalized for a spinal fusion at UC Davis Medical Center in October 1989. At the same time, your son was also a patient in pediatrics. I spent a lot of time in the unit, and so I saw you and your son from time to time walking the corridors. I was so moved by Joseph's bravery, his character so apparent in one so young. I will never forget him, and since that time I have often thought of him. Because of Joseph, I feel that I have been truly inspired. I wanted to let you know that he has made a difference in my life and that of my 16-year-old son, who joins me in offering condolences. Sincerely, Lori and Matt. As I cried, I couldn't help but remember what Joseph said to me so often after he had relapsed. I think you should have another baby, Mom. Those words stuck in my head like a constant echo. I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Joseph had planted the seed, and it was growing and growing. I had to tell Alberto. I had to ask him if we could have another baby. I couldn't let it go. I had to ask. Getting up the nerve over lunch one afternoon, I told Alberto of my request. Well, his reaction was less than I had hoped for. He said he was never going to have another baby. He never wanted to love anyone ever again the way he loved Joseph, and if I wanted to have another baby, that was tough. Alberto and I were not getting along very well since Joseph had died, and this was the icing on the cake for me. I was so upset at losing Joseph and all I wanted to do was fill the hole in my heart that he left. And besides, Joseph was the one who introduced the idea to me. Well, I was prepared for an answer of no. My bags were packed, I had $30 in my wallet, and I was all set in case Alberto didn't give me my way. A lot of emotions poured from my heart in my attempt to persuade Alberto. But the answer was still no. I told Alberto that I was not going to live my life for him anymore. I had given him all my loyalty and all my devotion. I had worshipped the ground he walked on. But during Joseph's illness, I felt that he had abandoned me, emotionally, mentally, and physically, and that I was not going to live for him anymore. That if he didn't want to give me a baby, then we were through. Promise or no promise to Joseph, I wasn't going to fight with him anymore. I was ready to walk, and he knew it. Alberto finally conceded and told me to look around for a doctor who could perform a vasectomy reversal. We arrived at the doctor's office with high hopes. Feeling very comfortable with him, we proceeded to explain our situation to him and our hopes of having another child. After examining Alberto in the other room and giving us reassurance that this procedure could be done, we talked cost. Much to our surprise, the figure for the reversal and hospital stay was way over $5,000. Looking at each other, with our hopes dashed, knowing we could never afford the procedure, we thanked the doctor very kindly. You see, we had just paid off all of Joseph's outstanding medical bills we owed, and his funeral expenses. We were broke. We had no money. Our savings was gone. The Joseph Alvarez fund was gone. We had no money. Leaving the doctor's office together, holding hands, with the doctor waiving the $60 consultation fee, we left. The ride home was good. Even though we received some pretty unhopeful news, we were at peace. Our togetherness was very harmonious. Just like the time when Dr. Amelon in Stanford told us that Joseph had an infection in his brain. Joseph and I should have been very distraught, but we weren't. We were at peace. And that was the same feeling that Alberto and I were feeling when we walked out of that doctor's office. Instead of being upset with each other, we were at peace. We told each other on that peaceful drive home that if God wanted us to have a baby, He would let us, no matter what, and that we would just pray about it. It was almost exactly 2 weeks later when the phone rang on an early spring morning. It was Alberto on the line, and he had the most exciting news. He told me that the doctor's nurse had called and told him that the doctor just couldn't get us off his mind. She went on to tell Alberto that the doctor had figured out a way for Alberto to have the vasectomy reversal done at a most reasonable price. Alberto then told me that the nurse said that the doctor, who shall remain nameless to adhere to his wishes, would perform the reversal in his office, with Alberto receiving a local only. The doctor's surgical technician agreed to donate his time and would be able to do all of this for us for $800. The nurse then asked Alberto if $50 a month would be too much. "Too much? Too much!" I exclaimed. We could afford $50. It was too good to be true. God had answered our prayers. Alberto had the vasectomy reversal about 2 weeks later and came through with flying colors. We weren't allowed to make love for 2 weeks after that, so he would have time to heal. But as soon as the word was go and we were able, Joseph and I... But as soon as the word was go and we were able, Alberto and I started trying for a baby. You can imagine how upset I was when my period rolled around. I was very angry and crying. I went into the bedroom and started talking to Joseph and pleading with him. At the same time I was doing that, I was praying and pleading and crying to God. I told him that I had done everything he told me to do, Please, give me another baby. All I want is another chance. Please, let me have another baby." All of a sudden, as if he was standing next to me, I heard Joseph. Joseph told me not to cry, that I would have another baby. He said, "You will have another baby, Mom." The voice was not in my head, and it was not in the air. It was a voice from heaven, allowed to penetrate my spirit. The voice echoed through me and then wrapped around me. It was Joseph's voice. He was able to communicate with me. As another month dragged on, Alberto and I tried more and more to have a baby. I waited for my period to come, but it did not. I went to the store and bought a pregnancy test. The test proved to be positive. I was pregnant. I was so happy. I called Alberto at work and told him the good news. I then called the doctor who performed the reversal. He was very surprised, but also happy for us. He then told me that he never had a patient become pregnant so soon after a reversal, that it was a miracle that I became pregnant so fast. Chapter 14. Hello, it's me. No matter how blessed I felt, and how much I realized what a miracle it was for me to be pregnant under the circumstances, I still wasn't happy. My heart was aching to hold, kiss, smell, and feel my son. Even though I knew I could never have this again, my soul yearned for Joseph. Mary, who had been through so much and was such a rock to me in my time of grief, was suffering also. She does not have one memory in her life that does not have Joseph in it. She was finding it increasingly harder and harder to be the person she once was without her brother. Her body was not whole anymore. Her right-hand man had been cut off. She didn't have the big brother she needed and depended on to be there for her. How would she end her sentences now? There was no more Joseph to ask, right, Joseph? Mary was floundering, and I wasn't much help to her. Alberto, on the other hand, learned to deal with Joseph's death by completely folding within himself. He was happy I was pregnant, even though he wouldn't have had the operation performed if it were not for the pressure I put him under. But he was not himself anymore. There was no laughter, no games, no tricks, no teasing. He was quiet and got cold much more often than he used to. He got up early and went to bed much earlier than he used to, before our lives were changed by Joseph's illness. He had aged. But if Alberto had aged slightly, I had aged dramatically. My face was drawn, with deep circles under my eyes. I had seen too much. I had witnessed too much pain. I could remember all and was not able to forget. My body ached for Joseph. I would open the drawer where I had stashed all Joseph's favorite clothes, and I would pick them up and smell them. Smell the brim of his favorite hats, just to feel close to him. Every night I would pray to God that I may see Joseph. Just one last time. That's all I wanted, just to see him, one more time. It was the night before Mother's Day in 1991. I was pregnant, just barely, and was missing Joseph very much. That night, I had the best dream. I dreamt that I was at the Nord School at one of their school functions. I realized after a bit that Joseph was nowhere to be found. I started searching for him everywhere and asking teachers, students, and parents alike if they had seen him, but to no avail. I entered the school's multi-purpose room and realized that there was a stairway there that had never been there before. As I climbed the stairway, I could see many, many floors of the school, climbing higher and higher into the sky. The higher I climbed, the more people I ran into, but I didn't know any of them. Each person I met, I asked the same thing. Have you seen Joseph? But still, no luck. The higher I climbed, the more distraught I became. I couldn't find my son. Where could he be? Why was he hiding from me? Finally, I came to the top floor in a huge room with a silvery pink hue to it. In the distance of the room, I could see a hospital bed with someone in it with IV poles next to the bed connected to the person in that bed. I slowly walked closer and closer to the bed. The person in the bed had the sheets pulled over their head. I pulled the sheets back and saw a little girl. She seemed familiar to me, but I really didn't know who she was. Perhaps a child I had seen in one hospital or another. I do not know. I asked this small girl, with the blondish, thinning hair and the sunken dark eyes, if she knew where Joseph was. She said she didn't know any Joseph, but maybe he was across the room. Pointing in the opposite direction in which I was standing, I walked toward a playpen. There was a TV on with cartoons playing, and a big man standing near the TV and playpen who looked to be a security guard. As I approached the playpen, I started to pick up a toy, which was inside, when out popped Joseph from under the pile of toys in the playpen. I was so surprised. I told him that I was looking and looking all over for him. We smiled big smiles at each other. I'll never forget the twinkle in his eyes that looked like stars. I hugged him because I was so happy to see him. I leaned over and kissed him. As our lips touched, the feeling was so real. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a real kiss. A real kiss from Joseph that I had been longing for. As our lips met, I awoke. I had gone too far. God had answered my prayers and allowed me to dream of Joseph and see him, but not to touch. It was quite a while before I was able to dream of Joseph after that, even though I prayed to every day. I was pregnant, and everything was going according to plans. The baby inside me was healthy. Alberto was working, and Mary was finishing up the school year. As summer approached, days got lazier for me. I would sleep in later than usual. Mary was a kind of kid that liked to sleep in also, so we made a perfect pair. Joseph had been gone for maybe a little over 4 months now. That is when strange things started to happen around the house. The first incident happened when no one else but me was around. As I was attending to my daily household chores, the dishwasher, for no reason, turned on by itself. This had never happened before, and I was very surprised when it happened for the first time. But I could also feel a presence in the house. I really felt it was Joseph trying to communicate with me. The moment I told Alberto, he dismissed it as electrical failure of some sort. Then, the dishwasher performed its amazing act while he was at home. After that happened, Alberto wondered himself if Joseph was not trying to communicate somehow. The dishwasher trick was not the only strange occurrence that happened during that time. The front door would open on occasion, by itself, from time to time. The phone would ring, but there would be no one on the line. My earrings would come up missing, for no reason at all, and then would be found in the strangest places. You wouldn't think too much about these things, if they happened once in a while, but some strange thing would happen on a daily basis, and they all started to occur shortly after I became pregnant. One morning, after school was already out for the summer, Mary and I were both sleeping in. All of a sudden, I was awakened to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song. This was playing over and over. At first I thought I was having a dream, until I woke up and realized that the song was playing, and it was coming from the other room. I got up and went into Mary's room, thinking she was playing Joseph's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles handheld game. But she wasn't. She was in her bed, starting to come to, being awakened by the song herself. I went over to the game, picked it up from its coveted spot on the shelf, which hadn't been touched since Joseph had died, and turned it off. Well, it wouldn't turn off. It kept playing and playing. Over and over the theme song played. I held the game in my hand, pushed the off button again, but on it played. Finally, I turned the game over and took out the batteries. It stopped. That was the strangest thing. Later in the week, we put the batteries back into the game and moved the game to a different spot in that house. Strange occurrences that I have no rational explanation for kept happening in the house. One day, when Alberto was eating lunch by himself because I was in town, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game theme song started playing over and over. Alberto reached for it, examined it, and then hit the off button, but on played the theme song. He too had to take the batteries out to get the theme song to stop. He didn't know why the game automatically turned on by itself. Perhaps an electrical glitch, like the dishwasher, or the front door. One large gust of wind that we couldn't hear or feel, it was so quick. Maybe, but I don't think so. No one really knows how far or how close heaven is, or what God allows or disallows to those angelic beings who live there. I know I don't have the answers to those questions. All I know is that I could feel Joseph's presence every time something of that nature occurred. One particular evening, I was so tired, so very, very tired. I slipped into sleep much quicker than usual. I was in that place between awake and asleep, and I felt as if I was in the spirit world. I could slip deeper into sleep if I wanted to, but I could not awaken no matter how hard I tried. In that state, I could hear footsteps walking down our hallway, but with my eyes cracked open, I could see no one. Then I heard someone, a man or a boy, urinate in the bathroom, but not flush the toilet. Next to me, I could feel Alberto sleeping, so I knew it wasn't him. The footsteps continued down the hall. All of a sudden, a puppy burst into our room. Not a real puppy, but a spirit puppy. The puppy Alberto had bought for me after Joseph died, but was run over by a pickup. This puppy used to jump onto our bed and run around. Well, during this evening, the puppy was back, but in a different state. I could see the outline of the puppy's form and the imprint of the paws on the bed. I was a little scared. This had never happened to me before. Just as suddenly as the puppy had jumped onto the bed, it jumped off and ran down the hall. I tried to wake up and talk, but I couldn't. I could see with my eyes cracked open, but could not awaken. Finally, I gave in and went to sleep. The next morning, I told my story to Alberto and Mary. It was believable, considering all the other crazy events that were taking place in the house.